안녕하세요. 사회고등학교 영어토론대회 대망의 결승전, 이제 잠시 뒤에 시작이 되는데요. 저희 YTN은 대회 결승전을 최초로 생중계해드리겠습니다. 오늘 해설은 한국외국어대학교 통번역대학원의 정철자 교수님께서 해주시겠습니다. 안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
네, 이제 결승전에 오를 두 팀이 결정이 됐는데요. 요이 피날레 팀과 또 SWY RMC 팀이 이제 선정이 됐고요. 이제 잠시 뒤면 두 팀의 열띤 토론을 볼 수가 있을 텐데요. 해마다 이제 열기가 더욱더 더해지고 있는데 어제 직접 현장에 가셨었죠? 어땠나요?
예, 어제 개회식 참가하고 좀 둘러봤는데요. 올해는 115개 팀 345명이 참가해서 정말 열띤 경쟁을 벌이고 있습니다. 작년 대비 한 2배 정도 오른 수입니다.
그렇군요. 그러면 이제 잠시 뒤에 결승전이 펼쳐지게 될 텐데요. 주제가 뭔가요?
예, 올해 주제는 예산 배정에서 정부 예산 배정에서 복지보다는 과학 분야를 우선해야 한다라는 주제로 결승전을 치르게 되겠습니다.
네, 조금은 이제 어려운 주제가 아닐까 이런 생각도 되는데요. 이 주제는 그러면은 이미 선정이 된 주제죠?
예,
언제 결정이 됐습니까?
주제는 한 달 전에 미리 공지가 됩니다.
네.
그렇기 때문에 학생들이 아마 많은 자료를 가지고 연습도 하고 준비를 많이 했을 것으로 생각됩니다.
그렇군요.
이 주제 같은 경우 우리 지금 국내 대선을 앞두고도 많은 관심을 가지고 사람들이 보는 그런 주제가 아닐까 생각을 하는데요.
그렇군요. 근데 그 찬성인지 반대인지는 언제 그게 결정이 되나요?
예, 준결승전을 끝내고
네.
결승전 팀이 이제 선정이 되면 두 팀이 동전 던지기로 찬성과 반대를 결정을 합니다. 그렇기 때문에 이건 사전에 준비를 하지만 우리 팀이 찬성을 할지 반대를 할지 모르기 때문에 아마 양 팀은 준비 과정에서는 양쪽 팀 모두를 다 준비를 했을 걸로 생각합니다.
네, 그렇군요. 그 의회식 토론 방식으로 이제 진행이 되지 않습니까? 이게 어떤 방식인지 좀 간략하게 설명을 해주시죠.
예, 토론에는 여러 가지 방식이 있는데요. 뭐 1인이나 한 2인 정도가 조가 돼서 일방적으로 자기 연설만 하고 아니면 상대방과 1대1로 그냥 토론을 하는 그런 형식들이 있는데요. 의회식 토론 토론은 일단 3명이 한 팀이 돼서 토론을 하게 됩니다. 그렇기 때문에 개인 토론을 잘해야 되기도 하지만 또 팀 전체가 조화를 잘 이뤄야 된다는 그런 그 큰 장점이 있는 대회 방식입니다.
네, 그렇군요. 그만큼 팀워크가 중요하다 이렇게 볼 수가 있을 것 같은데요.
그렇습니다.
진행은 이제 찬성팀이 먼저 시작을 하게 되죠.
예, 그렇습니다.
네, 그러니까 찬성팀은 SWYRMC 팀이 맡게 됐고요. 또 반대는 요이 피날레 팀이 맡게 되는데요. 이제 곧 시작이 되는 것 같은데요. 한번 현장으로 가보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 이제 막 시작이 되려는 것 같은데요. 그러면 이제 첫 번째 연사가 나왔습니다. 참성부터 시작을 하게 되고요. SWY RMC 팀이 되겠습니다. 첫 번째 연사는 이상우 학생입니다. 대원 외국어고등학교에 들어보도록 하죠.
$200 billion. That's how much NASA had invested into the space shuttle program. And today we as a proposition stand here to tell you why we are willing to invest $100 billion more. The development of science in the final frontier developed better insulators to keep space shuttles safe and our homes warm, better preservatives for astronauts for also developing nations, and better fuels for spaceship for our explorations. World hunger, disease, and even chronic disease. To these problems, science will be our answer, and one way or the other. Science has and will not only save us from the impending disasters we face as a humanity, but also allow us to become better people. Before moving further into the proposition's case, let's define some key terms. We would define scientific research as research into questions posed by scientific theories and hypotheses, which may lead to practical application of those scientific knowledge. We would define social welfare programs as programs that provide assistance to needy individuals and families. Today, the proposition stands for the value of betterment of human lives, extending the period of human life as well as improving the quality of human life. Today, I, as the Prime Minister, will be bringing you the first 2 points. The first point regarding science as a savior, how science saves our lives, and the second point being science as a liberator, how science democratizes our political systems. My partner Yerin will talk about the third point, about science as a mentor, how science changes our thinking. Now, without further ado, let's move on directly into the first substantive point, about science as a savior, how scientific developments and discoveries extend and better life. I'm going to divide this argument into two parts. First part being scientific development, and second part being scientific discoveries. So first analysis regarding scientific developments. Humanity, ladies and gentlemen, operates under conditions of limited resources where we need to make intelligent choices to survive. Problems such as world hunger would be non-existent if there was an infinite amount of food to go around to everyone. So today's motion asks us to make a choice as well. If we have limited resources, do we invest in science or social welfare programs? The nature of science, however, is that it expands our horizons by making more of the resources we already have. Malthus, a renowned political economic scholar, predicted that because human population is increasing geometrically, whereas agricultural production is increasing linearly, humanity is destined to suffer from a mass famine. Malthus was right. Until science was able to develop chemical fertilizers and other revolutionary agricultural technologies that actually allowed food production to catch up with population growth. Malthus' doomsday scenario was prevented thanks to science, ladies and gentlemen. Similar examples can be found in the development of penicillin to be a more efficient antibiotic to cure more diseases with less costs. The development of flexible steel columns allows us to build skyscrapers and make more use of the limited amount of land we have. Whereas social welfare is only capable of redistributing the resources we have, science is capable of creating new resources. Through science, humanity is able to make more of the limited resources and live not just a better quality of life, but more quantities of life as well. For science prevents people from dying. Let's move on to the second analysis about scientific discoveries. Science not only allows us to use the resources we have been using more efficiently, but it also allows us to start using resources that we thought we could not use before. Most of medicine is reflective of this characteristic. For example, thousands were dying continuously in Africa because of malaria. It was not until it was discovered by science that malaria is carried through mosquitoes and that simple mosquito nets would prevent massive deaths. The answer from social welfare would have been to raise taxes and give out more handouts for funeral subsidies, ladies and gentlemen. Smallpox, another example, was a devastating disease that mercilessly struck out infants and adults alike. But go home today and look to your left forearms. The small dent you will feel in your skin is the vaccination that allows us to be here today. For had it not been for the discovery of vaccination in the first place thanks to science, half of us here would not be fortunate enough to be here in the first place. So how would we have known without science that giving ourselves the very disease we fear would arm us to fight against that particular disease? The same applies to polio and childhood paralysis as well. Scientific discoveries shield us from impending harms. Social welfare, ladies and gentlemen, to some extent may help you live life somewhat fairly, but science will allow you to live more. Moving on to the second substantive point about science as an equalizer.
Point of information, sir.
But before moving on, yes.
Science technology has allowed us to build stronger and more effective weapons, but how does that save more lives in wars?
Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of weapons, if you're talking about weapons, first of all, that's only a part of science, so you have to consider the fact that science has actually saved millions of lives. And secondly, when those weapons are developed, we see, for example, the nuclear weapon being actually used as a deterrent to prevent further war. We think that it's actually not being used in that way, that nuclear bombings are happening everywhere in the earth and humans are dying. So that's something that the opposition should take into account. Now, moving into the second substantive point about science as an equalizer. We think that science also has political ramifications as well. It is a democratizer of our states. Both developments in science pertaining to reproduction allows us to have a more vibrant civil society. Before Gutenberg's development of printing press, the distribution of ideas and knowledge was far more difficult and was monopolized by the ruling class. Had it not been for printing, knowledge and communication would have been the privilege solely of the ruling class, ladies and gentlemen. Also, the development of pictures and movies allows us to reproduce original documents and works so that they can be viewed from multiple places at the same time. Roland Barthes states in his essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, that the development of pictures and filming allowed people to have multiple interpretations of the same object. Before, the object could be only viewed in one place, and it was easier for the government and the vested rights holders to dictate their meaning. But, for example, the enigmatic smile of the Mona Lisa can be tracked back to one Oxford professor's essay and not some mutual consensus. The technology of reproduction allowed people to hold different opinions about objects and therefore reality as well. Now, what does this lead to, ladies and gentlemen? This led to pluralism, development of mixed opinions, and therefore a more vibrant, civil, and democratic society. There is no need to explain how in the status quo, the internet and social networking services are fulfilling this same function and accelerating the development of a vivacious democracy. Science does not ask people to be dependent upon the existing system, like social welfare does. Science empowers people to hold different opinions and change the whole system, ladies and gentlemen. So what have we shown you today? We have shown you that unlike social welfare, which focuses on redistribution of the resources that we already have, science creates new resources and provides us most effective mechanisms to utilize the resources that we already have. And we also told you that science has political ramifications as well, that it acts as a force that drives democracy. And because we realize that science stands for the value of betterment of humans in terms of quantity and quality, we're very proud to propose.
네, 이제 첫 번째 연사의 말을 들어봤습니다. 그러니까 그 예산 책정에 있어서 과학 분야의 사회복지보다 우선 해야 한다라는 그 주장을 폈는데요. 교수님 어떻게 보셨습니까?
예, 지금 첫 번째 연사는 과학 연구 범위를 순수에서 응용까지 지금 포함을 하고 있고요.
네.
이 과학 발견을 통해서 생명을 구원하게 되고 따라서 인간 생활을 개선한다. 그리고 여러 가지 그 과학 기술 발전으로 지식 공유라든지 자원 분배도 평등해짐으로 정치 민주화까지 이룰 수 있다라는 주장을
네.
하고 있는데요. 그렇기 때문에 한정된 자원이라 그러면 과학에 투자를 해야 한다는 거죠.
네, 이제 그러면 반대팀의 첫 번째 연사의 의견 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
And that is what the opposition stands for. Because we believe that when the need of people is not fulfilled by the government, then there's no way they can move on to higher grounds like the ones they promote, like democracy. Good rhetoric, but doesn't work in the practical world if people do not have places to live in, if people do not have food to feed themselves. In the spirit of the motion, we believe that the action of funding scientific research over social welfare, as the motion states, the actors should be the government, not any other actors. And we also believe that the welfare in today's motion is something about helping the poor structurally. We're going to give them the basic requirements of life. We're not going to be the nanny states who give them every single thing that they might want to have, but we're going to give them and provide and guarantee to them the basic dignity every human deserves. Having that clear, the opposition has three very strong arguments to prove that the motion falls. One, welfare is for the people and the public. Two, welfare is the government obligation. And three, the welfare is needed right now. But as a leader of opposition, I will elaborate upon the first two arguments. But before I move into the opposition's substantial arguments, I would like to attack the proposition's points and explain to you why they fail completely. Let's move on to their first argument, save life. No, thank you. Well, their first argument doesn't work, first of all, because they said they will somehow make more use of resources. But I want to ask to them if making more use of resources or if making use of more resources is more important than keep living on. Because in places like developing countries, people are starving right now. They don't have food, they don't have places to sleep in. And without these basic requirements fulfilled, there is no use going for high-tech media or high-tech weaponry or high-tech researches. The basic need must be fulfilled before you go on to other things that we would like to have. The second reason their first argument doesn't work is because the things they propose bring positive results in the end, but take a very long time. Again, we must tell you the urgency of some people who are living in this world. Because of the urgency, we need to attack those needs right now. We need to attend to their needs right now. What they're doing is increasing the quality of life in many years, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. Like they said in the beginning of their speech, we spent billions of dollars on space exploration. But what kind of specific results, what kind of tangible benefits did they bring to our daily lives? They never provided us that example. And if they want to argue that scientific research will immediately help the people, quality of the people who are very needy at the moment, they need to tell us how scientific research brings short-term benefits as well. Having that clear, I'd like to move on to their second argument, democracy. They said the science helped people reach the democracy they wanted. Exactly. Science helped them, and we say we already have very good tools. We already have very good tools for realizing the democracy we want. We do not necessarily have to bring about more technology, because right now with the internet, with the online connection that they promoted, everyone virtually has a connection and a voice and a way to reach out to the government right now. And that is the democracy. Democracy is everyone getting a chance to say, right? Getting a chance to speak up. And we say that that is already established. And going for more high-tech technology might be good, but that is not any more important than giving people the basic dignity they deserve. So great rhetoric proposition, but little practical value. Having that clear, I'd like to move on to the first argument of the opposition, that welfare is what's for the people and for the public. Now, the scientific researches usually benefit only a certain group of people, or more likely, scientific researches benefit a certain group of people more exclusively than they do all the people. For example, when government funds scientific researches, the funds are usually channeled through certain organizations like high-level educational labs or research labs. In those labs, the people who work there are already educated people who are already capable of making their livings, who are already capable of pursuing a quality life on their own. When the government gives fund to those scientific researchers, in short term, the government is helping only a specific group of people who are already capable of fulfilling their own needs. And then the opposition must bring up this fundamental question again. What about the people with urgent needs who need the basic needs at the moment? Yes, ma'am.
We need not just a cure for cancer and cure for AIDS. How is your social welfare going to protect that?
Because in developing nations right now, it's not the problem they do not have the medicine. The medicines for the respiratory diseases, which is the most common in developing countries, are already there. The problem is that the people do not have the access to those problems. The problems like cancer are less common. The problem like cancers are more of a problem in the developed nations where the needs are already fulfilled. You're neglecting a majority of the population at the moment, the people who are lacking the basic needs. Now, moving on to the impact of our first argument. Without the welfare, the people will lose the trust in the government. If your government cannot feed you when you're starving for a week, if your government cannot provide you a shelter right now when you're freezing out in the cold, how can you trust the government for more higher goals? If the government cannot give you any practical benefits at the moment when you need them so dearly, how can you trust the government to cure your cancer if you happen to catch them? Because after all, you might not survive all the cold and the hunger before you even catch the cancer, right? And we say that lacking this basic dignity, not fulfilling these basic needs, leads to further detriment on democratic functions and scientific researches. Because in those cases, there's less labor force, because there are less people wishing to live in the country, wishing to cooperate with the government. And when those basic education, when those basic parts are not fulfilled, people are incapable of moving on to higher goals. Now let me move on to the second argument of the opposition, that it is the government obligation to protect those people. We have a consensus on the social contract theory, which is that people waive some of their rights for the basic protections that the government promises to provide. Those basic protection includes certain quality of living. And therefore, it is an obligation of the government to provide welfare to the people. This is a theoretical, principle, ethical, and historic background on which the opposition stands. If the proposition wants to argue that their scientific research, which will take years for people to benefit from, is more important than the immediate needs, they need to refute this basis as well. We say that scientific research is less of an obligation of the government than the welfares, because the scientific researches is extending the quality of your life rather than ensuring the minimum necessity, minimum dignity of your lives. And therefore, we, the team opposition, stands on the side of human dignity, stand on the side of needs over wants. Ladies and gentlemen, what did I tell you today? I told you today that their first two argument falls, and that we have very strong two arguments, that the welfare is for people, and that welfare is the government's obligations. For these reasons, I'm proud to oppose. Thank you.
네, 그래서 이제 그 반대팀의 첫 번째 연사까지 들어봤는데요. 뭐 막상 막하인 것 같아요. 어떻게 보셨나요?
예,
네.
이 두 번째 지금 이제 반대팀의 첫 번째 연사는
네.
이 찬성팀에서 이야기한 거는 너무 요원한 일이다 하는 그 주장만 한 건데요.
네.
지금 이 반대팀에서 정부를 정확하게 지명했다는 것이 상당히 강점으로 보입니다.
네.
정부가 복지는 책임을 져야지 인간의 존엄성이 확보가 되고 그래서 과학 발전을 꾀할 수 있을 거다라는 주장을 한 거네요.
네, 그러면 이제 또 찬성팀의 두 번째 연사는 어떻게 반격을 할까요? 들어보도록 하죠.
May I begin? Ladies and gentlemen, team proposition is for the value of human embetterment. That means that we don't just want to let more people live, we want them to live better. Because what we see on team proposition stance is science is an innovator. Science creates the practical solutions. Science is what changes the core of this world, because we are going to be providing the practical solution and the practical benefits behind our moral framework as well. And under that value, as the Deputy Prime Minister, I'll be doing mainly three things in my speech. Firstly, resubstantiating to the arguments made by my excellent Prime Minister. Secondly, rebutting to the arguments made by the Leader of Opposition. And thirdly, moving on to my own substantive point, which will be about science as a mentor. Now, first for resubstantiation. Now, our Prime Minister gave you two very clear substantive points. Number one, science as a savior. And number two, science as an equalizer. And to this, they had a few things to say. First of all, they mischaracterized science and they set up a false dichotomy of social welfare as a human need and science as a human want. We completely reject this false dichotomy. We think that science is a solution. It provides the need, and it provides to the needs, and it also provides the humans' wants. It provides practical solution. Team opposition says they want to save cancer and they want to save like AIDS patients. We want to do that too, but under their stance, they don't have a practical solution and any practical framework to do that, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why team proposition is actually for human and betterment. Secondly, we want to draw your attention to the word prioritize, because they make it sound like we reject social welfare completely. That's not true, ladies and gentlemen. We think that some level of social welfare is admirable. We don't want a society where there's no social welfare. We're not going to kill these people in the streets. But what we're saying is that science should be prioritized over the social welfare, because too much social welfare is not good for society. Why? Because it creates dependence. Look at countries like in Northern Europe, like Finland. Those countries, when people are unemployed, they're okay with it because the government is going to fund their unemployment anyways. We don't want to create that system. Instead, we want to create a system of fast revolution and practical solutions to the world's needs. Also, she said that we have to attend to those needs, and we have to attend to those needs now. We agree, but under their stance, we don't have any practical solution to attend to those needs as well. They say that people are hungry, but under their stance, they have limited resources resources, but good intentions. But we say that under our stance, we expand our resources. We have GMO technology. We make more food, and therefore we're by more able to effectively distribute those limited resources to those people. And that's how we're for human embetterment, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you, ma'am. And secondly, to our point about science as an equalizer, well, they said two things. First of all, they said that the mechanisms are already there. Why are they there in the first place, ladies and gentlemen? Because of science. And science will further create such revolutions and innovations if we foster them and if we prioritize them over social welfare. But secondly, they say science takes too long time. We don't know when they're going to find a solution. First of all, that's not true. We see that social welfare takes a lot of time as well. What the opposition talk about is aid and immediate relief. We don't think that's the same as social welfare. We can give you aid, we can give you immediate relief, but that's not really social welfare, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, we're saying that the fundamental solutions to all the problems that team opposition has identified is science. Science is the solution to address the needs that they have identified and both the wants that they've also identified as well. So we think that that is why we must prioritize science. Yes, ma'am.
Why is giving immediate needs not part of social welfare?
We think that when a country is in need, when you need, let's say, we're in Africa and we need a solution to AIDS, we think that given that medication is not a part of social welfare because it's not the government that is saying, wow, we need to take this part of our money and distribute to this sort of citizens and take the money away from things such as NASA. That's how it's different, ladies and gentlemen. We are also for human embetterment. And with that said, I'd like to move on to my rebuttals. First of all, to her first substantive point about how their policy is for the people and the public, we think we like her moral rhetoric, but we don't think that she has a practical framework to support it. Because what she's saying is people have needs, people have wants, people are sick, and people are hungry. But what are they going to do about it with the limited resources? Not much. Rather, on our side, we provide you with the practical benefits because we have the power of science. We can improve. We can make medicines. We can make more food. And we could distribute it more efficiently to those people because we're not operating under a limited framework, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, to her point about how welfare is a government obligation, she talked about the social contract, but we think that they're having a very limited view on what social contract encompasses, ladies and gentlemen. We think the social contract can operate under many, many ways. The little nanny state that they mentioned where we will just be providing endless aid to these people over and over again without trying to find a practical solution could be a definition of social aid. But what we're rooting for is practical benefits. And that is the social contract that we want. We want the government to provide us a practical framework to the solutions of these people. And we want to do this fast because these people are, as they conceded, dying, and they are in dire need of these sorts of solutions. And science, as we told you again and again, will be the provider and will be the practical solution within this framework. No, thank you, ma'am. And with that said, I'd like to move on to my third substantive point, which is about science as a mentor. How science not only has tangible benefits, but also creates cultural developments, ladies and gentlemen. We divide this into two levels of analysis. First, about science and culture. We think that culture is limited by advancements in science, ladies and gentlemen. The way we live and the way we express ourselves is vastly reliant upon scientific discoveries. If you go to art museums and you see portraits, you see that many of these paintings will not contain a certain blue type of paint because those are commissioned by only the rich artists and the rich people such as Marie Antoinette. And you see the same was true with purple cloth. And we also give you the example of Andy Warhol and the silk screens that he created. Those are only possible due to modern painting techniques that was developed by science. So we don't think that science is only something cold, such as weapons and space-related things. We think that science has a very integral part of our lives, an integral part of our culture, and you're out of order, ma'am, and an integral part of our society, ladies and gentlemen. This moves me on to my second level of analysis about paradigmatic shifts. So how does science have a more significant impact on our culture? We think that before the 20th century, most of our philosophy was focused on deterministic rules of absolutism. That means that there was only one truth. But thanks to the philosophy born from the three theoretical thinkers, three scientists, Einstein, Heisenberg, and Gödel, though that no longer holds truth. Einstein's theory of relativity showed us that time was not an absolute, but a flexible dimension, and that led to the theory of philosophy of relativism. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle demonstrated how we cannot know the velocity and change accurately at the same time, and revived the idea of free will. And lastly, Gödel's incompleteness theorem proved that it was impossible to create a system that included every right answer. So we see that this extends to the argument of the fluidity of identity. Because of science, thanks to science, you're allowed to have identity, you're allowed to be right on various scales, and you're allowed to have the free will to express yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. So science doesn't only come with practical benefits, it comes with these lots of cultural and paradigmatic shifts as well. So because team government is a team that wants not only practical benefits, but also principally right benefits, and also free will as an added bonus, we're very proud to propose. Thank you.
네, 두 번째 연사 굉장히 다양한 측면에 걸쳐서 주장을 펴고 있어요. 어떻게 보셨나요?
예, 두 번째 연사는 지금 첫 번째 연사가 정의를 한 대 덧붙여서
네.
우선한다는 말을 좀 더 정의를 정확하게 했습니다. 그러니까 우선 과학 쪽이 우선한다고 해서 우리가 복지를 완전히 배제하는 것은 아니다라는
네.
점으로 첫 번째 연사를 좀 보강을 했고요. 그 다음에 상대방 쪽에서 했었던 그런 여러 가지 입장을 반박을 했습니다. 복지도 시간 걸리는 거다.
네.
그리고 과학 발전이 결국은 문화 발전으로 또 패러다임 변화로 정체성 발전으로까지 연계된다고 해서 자기 팀 입장을 상당히
Mr. Speaker,
공고하게
Madam Speaker,
했습니다.
ladies and
네,
gentlemen,
그럼 이제
the
다시
fundamental
반대편의
flaw
주장
of team
들어보겠습니다.
proposition is that they give a laundry list of benefits that we can gain from science. Science is a savior. Science is a liberator. Science is a mentor. But they don't tell us why we should necessarily prioritize science over social welfare, because simply having benefits doesn't mean we should prioritize something over the other. And that's exactly what I'm going to do in my speech. I'm going to tell you why we should necessarily prioritize welfare over science. I'm going to do two things to show you that. Firstly, I'm going to rebut, and then I'm going to deliver the final substantive case we have on team opposition about why we should especially do it right now, why we should especially prioritize welfare over scientific technology right now. Before that, I have several points of refutation. Let's look at the first argument about how science saves lives. Okay, many points of refutation. First of all, we believe that what we need to counter global poverty or save lives is not creating more resources, it's better distribution of resources. In fact, if you look at the examples of food, for example, we have a lot of food thrown out. It's not that we don't have food to give to poor people, it's that food is not being distributed to the poor people. Another example, same goes for medicine. Medicine, we have a lot of medicine being created by the pharmaceutical companies, but because the price is so high, the poor people don't have access to it. So we think the key problem we have to solve today is not a matter of a shortage of resources, but it's a matter of how the poor get access to them. And we think that's exactly what welfare is about. Welfare is about who gets what, and to what extent. And we think that's exactly why we should prioritize welfare over scientific technology. But the second point of refutation is that we think they're missing a critical point, because we're not here to discuss about what science has done for us until now. We're here to discuss what science is about to do for us in the future. Are we going to continue to invest for potential science? And we think that's exactly why we should go for welfare more than science. Because when you talk about the future gains of science, it's very hazy. There's no guarantee. You don't know exactly whether people are going to succeed to get anti-cancer technology, but in terms of welfare, it's an extension of what we've been doing until now. The results are relatively much more guaranteed. We can just continue what we've been doing right now. We think, therefore, when we're talking in terms of prioritization, we should stick with something we're more sure with. We think we should stick with something that brings more clear, concrete benefits than something so hazy and so far away that even team proposition will fail to show you concrete examples of what potential scientific pursuits will bring to us today. And then in response to this point, the second speaker gave an absurd POI. She asked, how are we going to save people who are dying from cancer right now? Again, that's a false dichotomy, as if they're presenting as if we don't support science technology at all. We think that just simply investing more into welfare because its results are more concrete and immediate doesn't mean that we're going to abandon science. We think that's pretty self-explanatory to you judges and the ladies and gentlemen as well. And then thirdly, they gave us an absurd rebuttal about how this is going to create social welfare dependence dependency. That's not true. We don't understand how minimum education creates dependency. We think, in fact, welfare, by actually enabling people to take care of their most basic needs, it enables people to move on further. We think it's the most systematic and fundamental solution we can give people to actually get out of that vicious cycle of dependency. We think that's why welfare is much more effective than science when it comes to giving more power to people. Lastly, the last point of refutation. They tried to present welfare as if it's something that doesn't deal with immediate needs and and therefore doesn't save lives. That's not true. That's a misrepresentation. When we give food stamps to people who are unemployed, obviously we're saving lives because we're giving them food. We think welfare is therefore capable of saving lives immediately. We think that's a gross misrepresentation Team Proposition has done on behalf of Team Opposition. Let's look at their second argument, and obviously they're conceding to everything I'm saying because I'm not hearing any POIs. So their second argument was about democracy. Yes.
So how do you think we will fix the current problems we're facing of scientific innovations that are needed in developing
Proof to
nations?
us that continued investment into science will solve those problems. All you're showing us is this hazy, no guaranteed thing that somehow investment will bring these benefits, but you haven't shown to us how the future will help humanity, right? Okay, let's go back to their second argument. 2 points of refutation. First of all, they talked about how this increased access to knowledge, therefore more people were able to get democracy whatsoever. That's not a unique benefit of scientific technology. We think minimum education, as I've talked before, which is a part of welfare, achieves the same purpose. You have to come up with a unique benefit of science in order to tell us why we should prioritize science before welfare. But secondly, we think they're cherry-picking examples to serve their argument. Most of scientific technology, such as smartphones, space technology, or the fancy camera skills that we have in this room right now, their primary benefactors of this technology are the more privileged who can actually afford to have this technology. So we think, principally speaking, welfare is more consistent with the value of democracy because the lower 70% are entitled to those benefits in comparison to technology. Their final argument was about how science is a mentor, how this pursues self-expression, and we're about to think, we can think philosophically. Okay, first of all, we're not going to have people paint Mona Lisa or think Enlightenment ideals when people don't have jobs. That's a gross misprioritization of basic needs. We think that's a far less urgent need. We're going to take care of people who are dying right now. But secondly, self-expression is possible with already existing technology. Just look at me, for example. I'm expressing myself through this microphone. We think that we already have existing technology enough to express ourselves. You have to tell us why we need more technology in the future to make sure that we can express ourselves. Therefore, I challenge the next speaker to tell us what future concrete gains science can bring to us compared to the benefits that welfare is already giving to us. Having that clear, I'd like to go on to the final substantive case that Team Opposition has. I'm going to explain to you why, especially considering the status quo, why especially now we should prioritize welfare. But before that, yes.
What about instances in which distribution methods themselves became much more effective in dealing diseases like malaria?
We think that, first of all, the disease is necessary to to address malaria. We have existing scientific technologies that can actually address those problems. But second of all, we told you that it's a matter of distribution. We already have enough technology in terms of medicines. It's a matter of lowering the prices. It's a matter of guaranteeing access to the poor. We think that's something that we should focus on, not just necessarily creating more medicines when you can't even guarantee that the poor can get access to them. They can't guarantee that the poor can get access to them. Therefore, they don't prove that more people are saved. Anyways, back to my substantive case. Okay. The first thing I would like to talk about is I'd like to tell you that inequality gap is too big right now for us to prioritize science over social welfare. Now, especially because of the recent economic depression, there's a huge gap between the rich and the marginalized. For example, in 2010, in the United States, the top 1%'s income was 70% higher than the bottom 10%'s income. We think, therefore, prioritizing scientific research increases this gap, obviously by channeling necessary resources into technology instead of welfare. Now, why is this so bad? We believe that social welfare is the most effective method to close the gap by supporting the bottom lowest, making sure that they're covered by the safety net. And why is it bad that the social gap is increased than we have right now? We think that it actually lays more ground for social unrest, for resentment, and that eventually leads to more crimes and conflict. For example, in countries like Spain, Ireland, there's already enough social social unrest and conflict. We think that in the status quo, we're at a tipping point. Further pushing poor people into corner, cutting budget from social welfare is going to increase the kind of social unrest and conflict we have in the society. And we think that ultimately that's bad for the society. They have to prove to us why we should necessarily prioritize scientific technology at the cost of the safety of the society. We challenge our next speaker to do so. Overall, if you actually care for the lives of these people, vote for OP. Thank you.
네, 이렇게 해서 반대 두 번째 연사 들어봤습니다. 어떻게
예, 이
보셨습니까?
두 번째 연사 같은 경우는 우선한다의 기준을 찬성팀에서 정확하게 주지 않았다는 점을 굉장히 잘 지적을 했습니다.